Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today we have two very distinguished guests, Representative Gary Viens of Newport and Representative Mike Marcotte of Coventry. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott.
Did I overstate it? Are you distinguished, Gary?
No, not really.
What about you, Mike?
I don't think so.
But Mike, you are a very seasoned state representative now.
I've been in the, I'll be starting my 12th year come January. I've been on the Commerce and Economic Development Committee for all 12 years. I've been the vice chair there for 8 years.
And now, how's your sidekick doing? You're brand new to the, you got 1 year underneath your belt,
Absolutely
Gary.
correct. Coming up on our second year here in about 3 weeks.
Right. How's he doing, Mike?
Well, I think Gary's doing fine. I think that his second year is going to be a lot easier than his first year, as you know. First year is pretty tough, trying to get acclimated down there, how things work, building relationships with other lawmakers, and finding your way around the building and finding your way, amongst all the leadership.
Well, having served in the State House myself, I commend anybody, no matter what party, if you want to put yourself through it, because a lot of people, in all seriousness, they don't realize the work that goes into it. Some people get down here and they disappear and they don't work. But if I know both of you are not that way, but if you really take your job seriously, there's so much to do and there's so little time, and people don't realize that when they see you at meetings, you're not being paid in most cases. When you're back in your districts, you're only paid how many months a year are you paid?
About 4 months.
And then the rest of the time is just fun and games.
Absolutely correct.
It's a tough job if you take it seriously. I invited you here today to talk about the upcoming session because, this could be an exciting session because you have the speaker who's leaving and you have the governor who's leaving. And, to be realistic is they might try to pull a lot of surprises. Or do things that maybe not everybody agrees with. What do you see for this upcoming session?
Well, first off, I'm going to be very interested in the everybody's talking about the carbon tax.
Right.
And so I'm kind of curious to see if they actually, the 26 Democrats that are co-sponsors and sponsors of this bill actually move it forward. My inclination is that they won't, that they'll keep it parked for another year until after the election before they try to actually bring it out and try to pass this legislation.
Yeah, because I read somewhere that was not going to be coming out probably.
No, we're coming into an election year now, and I think that trying to push that legislation through would be a disaster for the Democrats. But I think that as we go forward, we have to be careful. Over a 10-year period, as that tax is, when they're talking about increasing it yearly,
Right.
After the 10th year, you're talking about $500 million in taxes.
Right.
It's supposed to somehow get back to the people, but I've been there long enough to know that when you have $500 million sitting there, it gets very tempting to start distributing it differently than what it was meant to be distributed.
All right, in a nutshell, though, for the listeners, what is the carbon tax?
Well, it's a tax on anything you use fossil fuels for. Your car, when you run your car, that's emitting carbon. Same with your home. When you heat your home, with either propane or fuel oil or natural gas, those are all going to be taxed.
So in other words, now that our fuel prices are within reason, because we've been paying a lot for fuel, especially heat and oil, they want to basically bring those prices back up?
Well, people get used to paying almost $4 a gallon for gas. They were paying close to $3 a gallon for fuel oil, and in some cases in kerosene they were over $3. And now those prices have been cut by about $1.50 as far as the fuel goes. And so I think the thought is that people won't notice that, you know, they get used to that higher price, that will bring the price back up again. But we all know that this is temporary as far as the low prices go, and eventually those prices are going to drive up again, and then you start putting Vermonters way out there on having to pay for their gas and heating oils. You just put it out of reach for them.
So what? So if you were forced to vote on it, how would you both vote?
Well, first off, I would absolutely vote no on it. Again, because like what Mike alluded to was the fact that today we have relatively inexpensive fuel prices. All of a sudden, like we all know, they are going to go up eventually, and when they go back to the $4 range, and a few years from now, with the way this carbon tax bill is set up, it goes to almost another $1 a gallon per gallon of usage. All of a sudden now you're paying $5 a gallon. People around here cannot afford it. Secondly, and more importantly, the way the system is set up, you know, we all drive cars, of the vast majority of us, 98% of us drive cars that burn fossil fuel. Not all of us can afford Teslas, and therefore, you know, it's kind of like a punitive tax where, again, the lowest common denominator, you know, middle class folks or
rural Vermonters are impacted, because in Chittenden County they have public transit.
Great public transit system. We're up here, you know, we've got the rural transit system, but it isn't anything like what they have in Chittenden County. So again, a lot of the supporters of this bill are from the Chittenden County area, and so we got to get away from that part of it and think about all Vermonters, not just Chittenden County.
Okay, on to a different topic on a revenue generator, marijuana legalization. There's belief that will bring a lot of money into the state. Gary, what's your thought? Well, you're a retired lawman.
Yes.
And I know some lawmen are actually for it, but I think more are against it. What are your thoughts on legalization?
Well, Scott, it's kind of funny because, again, as a person who was in law enforcement for 32 years, I know how the vast majority of the law enforcement feels, as well as I know the people who use marijuana, how they feel. Again, it's opposite sides of the spectrum. I, on the other hand, want to take a more pragmatic look at it. I want to talk to the doctors, the medical community, the scientists, because when I grew up, when I was going to school, you know, we always heard that marijuana was a gateway drug to harder drugs, and that was back when the THC content was 2-3%. All of a sudden now, with this hydroponic marijuana, it's 16+% THC content. So all of a sudden, what I want to find out is this all of a sudden good for us, or is it still a gateway drug? Is it dangerous to our health, the health of young Americans? And so when I hear from them, that's when I'll make up my mind.
Right, and I think you have a good point, because do you know, because I have not formed an opinion myself, but I do sometimes laugh about some of the arguments pro and con, like suddenly it's the cure-all. And so I recently wrote an article about, do you realize it wasn't too many decades ago that doctors were recommending the cure-all for almost everything? Cigarettes. Cigarettes were, you know, if you were pregnant, it was great for you. If you wanted to lose weight, it was great for you. And now you listen, you know, I sit back sometimes and I listen to the pro marijuana people, and they sound just like the hucksters selling cigarettes. Now, that isn't to say I'm against legalization, but I'm just saying let's get below the baloney on both sides. What do you think someday, because you own a store, Mike, will you be selling marijuana over the counter at this rate?
I don't know. It's hard to say how it's all going to come out. You know, I haven't made up my mind one way or the other of supporting or not supporting. I need a lot more information. I need to understand how Colorado and how Washington State have dealt with it, the issues that have come up there, And how are we going to craft a bill in Vermont to make sure that it's safe, that kids don't have access to it? I've heard a lot of issues with the edible marijuana in Colorado with kids getting access to it, emergency room visits, etc. So, you know, we shouldn't look at it as a revenue generator. We should be looking at it as something that is this a progression that should be happening, and is it detrimental to our society in Vermont? So I think we really have to step back and really study this hard. I mean, it hasn't been that long that it's been legalized in Colorado, so I don't think there's enough data out there yet to really understand and for us to form an opinion one way or the other about legalization.
And you know, I've talked to a lot of lawmen, and they've told me that, you know, to be realistic, you might be able to shoot this down, is if somebody is sitting in their house having a joint, there's not probably going to be somebody busting down your door to take your joint. I understand that I'm not saying law enforcement has a hands off, but they don't go out looking for a person having a joint or something.
Well, that's very true, Scott. But yeah, there's one other thing that we're kind of missing here is the fact that when people smoke a joint or whatever, get in the car and drive, they're driving under the influence. Right. The other thing that I'm looking forward to is being able to get a legal test for, you know, the consumption of marijuana, the THC content in the bloodstream. And until we have that reliable test there that can stand up in the court of law, again, I think we need to slow down and take a really long look at it.
You know, I heard something, I never thought of this, is it even impacts law enforcement in this sense. I talked to a dog handler who his dog is trained for drugs, but they don't distinguish necessarily what kind of drugs. He says that a lot of their findings now with their dogs will have to be, a lot of them will probably likely have to be retired. Yep. Because they're going to be hitting on marijuana, and you know, those will be, and if they find something else, they might be ruled inadmissible. But there's all kinds of factors that come into play. My biggest question is it really, with our opiate problem, is it really the time to really open this door? I'm just not so certain.
True.
Okay, opiates, that's been in the news big time. Do you have a solution to this problem? Is it overrated?
I don't know, not at all. We do have a real issue. I think it's getting worse. I think we really need to, first of all, really stomp on the dealers. I think that we've got to either look at our laws and put stiffer penalties in, trying to get these dealers as they're crossing the border, keep them out of Vermont. And second, I think we are increasing places where people are able to go and try to kick the habit. Right. But that's still not enough. We've got to continue to increase that, and we're working on it, but you know, everything's a money issue too.
Right. I had a young woman on this show. She's a recovering heroin addict, 10 years clean, and she was saying it's just, and that was 10 years ago. She hasn't used, and she was just telling me that she came right on here, talked about what it's like, the underworld, you know, whether it was going to like Holyoke or, you know, scamming doctors and such, and just how the whole process worked. And I actually commended her for, you know, coming out, and she was very public about this is the way it's done. Now, I have noticed lately the governor and former representative Harry Chen, who I worked with, and he's now the
Commissioner of the Department of Health.
They've been focusing their attention on doctors, though, in their prescribing patterns. Now, is that really an issue?
Well, I believe it is. I think overprescribing. Of course, there's doctor shopping that goes on. You know, I think we need a better system where doctors can find out if people are doctor shopping.
But we have a computer system now. I thought the state adopted one that seems to work.
Yeah, there was some. I think a few years ago we wanted to put some stronger things for the state to be able to go in and take a look, and that was shot down. So I think it could be strengthened a little bit more, but we're, you know, in my committee we deal with workers' comp, and that's something that we added to a bill last year, was looking at the opiate issue and workers' comp. So somebody gets hurt, they hurt their back, they're on workers' comp, and they're out of work, there's nothing for them to do, and they're on, you know, oxycodone or OxyContin, and before you know it, they get hooked. And then, so what's that doing to our workforce? So there's a lot of issues there that are going on.
Yeah, because I have a friend who actually fell into the world of, illegal drugs, and he blames nobody but himself. He broke, you know, the classic, he broke his ankle, and he learned to like those painkillers. And this is an upstanding citizen. He's an upstanding citizen once again, but for about a year, he will tell you what he went through to find his drugs. He could sit right here, he could tell you, you got to go to this doctor for that, go to this doctor for that, but don't even think about going to that doctor because they won't even give you aspirin. And you know, so it does happen, but I think doctors have come around. Okay, off of opiates, now what would you guys like to talk about, Mike?
Well, you know, one of the big issues that we deal with in my committee, and we have for the last several years, is independent contractor issues. And that has to deal with workers' comp and unemployment insurance, and it's really starting to come to a head. And we have been working with the Department of Labor, with Commissioner Noonan, and the Speaker, and my chair, Bill Botso, in our committee. And I'm going down Monday morning to meet with the Speaker and with the chair and with the Commissioner to see what we can do. The Commissioner has been working on language this summer to try to make it easier for businesses to understand if they're hiring an independent contractor, or are they classified as an employee?
Right, and even myself, who is in business, and yourself, I think yours is a little more clear-cut probably, right. Yeah. But in my case sometimes, that I've had to actually work with the departments to find out, okay, can I do this? Because I actually try to do everything legal, and I think I do, but sometimes it's hard to figure out the laws, and I find that some of the people in the positions who should know, they can't keep up with the changes either.
Right, and you know, it is very strict, and the interpretation is very strict of who is actually an independent contractor and who's actually an employee. And you know, some of this is safeguards to make sure that employees aren't taken advantage of by some unscrupulous businesses. But I think for the most part, people that are claiming that they're independent contractors actually are. And you know, they have their own business, they're registered with the Secretary of State, they have a business identification number, their tax numbers, they work for not just one company, but they're working for several different ones. So these are some of the things I think that the Commissioner is looking at, is to put into statute that would give some direction for not just businesses, but for the department also to classify people.
Okay. All right, Gary, what are your pet projects for the coming session, or a pet project?
Well, I'm on the Judiciary Committee, and we obviously will be taking up the marijuana law. That's going to take up a lot of our time, so that'll be fairly interesting. Some of the other things that we need to kind of get back to is the fact that Vermont taxes are still way too high. We're the affordability crisis in Vermont. We have to tackle that. We have to get spending under control. We've got to make it more realistic for the folks, again, the middle class who, lifelong Vermonters, they've been here, they've raised their family or trying to raise their family on small incomes. And again, we need to take care of them and therefore keep our spending at the State House under control within the rate of inflation. So that's, to me, is paramount for this next session.
No, I think
also, the green energy issue here, where we've got this issue over in Irisburg right now with the with those two wind turbines. Again, when it comes to global warming, yeah, I believe that there is such thing as global warming, but we have to take a realistic approach to it. We can't ruin every Vermont mountaintop just to put wind towers up there. It goes back to what I'm always saying about 20 years ago, what did a cell phone look like? It was a big box thing. I remember having it in my cruiser and a big antenna on the back of the trunk and everything. Nowadays, we got a computer. Every one of us has a computer on our hip pocket, capable of pretty much going around the world. So again, we need to take a look at that from a green energy standpoint. What's wind power going to look like in 20 years? Let's not destroy the mountaintops and mountain ranges in Vermont. Let's take a slower approach to this, and we can get there.
You know what I really worry about this coming session is, because let's be real, this is a strange December. But when I served in the State House one year, it was really warm in January, and some people utilized it and monopolized the first few weeks of session on global climate change. Those, I'm not saying that is not an important issue.
It is.
But we also have some pressing things, and I'm just hoping that, some people won't use this December to push that agenda and brush aside some of the more immediate issues, because I do believe no matter how you look at it, we do have climate change. Is it man-made? I don't know.
Well, but there's distractions down there. There's things that are brought up that are used to distract the public away from budgets, other things like that.
And it isn't by accident either, I don't believe.
Probably not.
I think sometimes in the state, I happen to think there's still a lot of honor in the Vermont State House. Compared to the national scene, I still think there's most people who serve in the Vermont legislature. I might vehemently disagree with some people, but I still think most people who serve are good, in that we might just have different ways of viewing things.
Absolutely.
Okay, I do want to ask you this, because believe it or not, we are only down to about 7 minutes left, is how do you think there's going to be a lot of moving parts this session, because you have folks like the governor who is stepping out, and then you have Schaap who is leaving after this session. Then you have the lieutenant governor who is going to be running for governor, but then you have other people like you have Keisha Ram who's running for lieutenant governor. Are you going to be able to get work done with all these people jockeying around, or will that disrupt life or not?
I don't think so. I think that things will function as well as they function down there. I think it's probably going to be easier now that Schaap isn't running for governor. I think that the tough part is going to be the following session. That's where you're going to have a new governor. You're going to have a new speaker. Who's the governor going to be? I right now would put my money on Phil Scott.
Same, absolutely, Phil Scott in my opinion.
But the 4 people that are running right now are all good people. I really don't know Bruce Lissman, but I know the other 3, and they're all good people. But I think Phil is the one.
Right. The race I think is totally up for grabs. I look at the lieutenant governor's race. I love to watch races. I prefer to watch and not take part anymore. But I can't. That race I think that's totally up for grabs.
It could be. I think Randy Brock has the advantage right now. Randy's, served as a state auditor. He's known statewide. He has that name recognition. The other two right now are both from Chittenden County. So there's some advantage to that. Our most populous county and our most democratic county too. So.
Will they try to drive something? But with the speaker leaving, with the governor leaving, will they try to drive anything through as the last hurrah that maybe the average Vermonter won't like?
Well, I don't think so.
I don't see anything.
I mean, again, we're coming up. It's an election year. The Democrats are in control of the state house. They're in control of the governor's seat. I think that anything, if they try to push through something that's extremely controversial, I think would detrimental to them come November.
Okay, we only have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to give you both like 2 minutes to talk about one more of your pet projects, or if you want to join, if you're both working on one that really concerns you.
Well, I'm personally not working on it per se, but one bill down there that passed last year, Act 46, the education bill, I see a lot of problems with it. We need to go back and streamline it, fix it. So that bill to me seemed like it was a David and Goliath issue. It was the Chittenden County folks versus the rural folks.
How does it affect Vermont, rural? How does it hurt our region, and how does it help it?
Well, they're asking for us to, it almost looks to me as if they're blaming a lot of the rural Vermont on the issues at hand, the high cost of education, the smaller class sizes, and the rural schools, the ghost students, things of that nature. Again, we need to go back and we need to relook at this bill. But the bottom line is, as far as I'm concerned, is it's fixable, and we don't need to attack one against the other. There's a high student funding issue for, like, again, Chittenden County area, where their average cost per pupil is $18,000 plus. Where up here in the Northeast Kingdom, we're doing it for $14,000 and a little around $14,000 a year. So again, cost per pupil, much cheaper up here to educate our kids. But again, they're trying to save money on the backs of the small rural schools, and I see that as a major problem.
Well, and one of the ways they're doing that is through what they call the caps. Mm-hmm. And I think it was in the paper today. It's killing our schools around here. Gary, I don't think there was one legislator from the Northeast Kingdom that voted for that bill.
There wasn't. And
that the caps went in at the last minute in the conference committee, and I think that it's being looked at as going against the Brigham decision. Okay. So I think that you're going to see that addressed right away when we get back there, because our schools up here are having a terrible time trying to come up with a budget. Even when they're cutting, they're going over that spending cap.
Okay, with only a couple more minutes left, I am going to allow you now, Gary, just to address the listeners on any topic you want.
Really? All right. Well, one thing that I'd like the listeners to know, that I know both Mike and I go to Montpelier every day during the session, and we work extremely hard for the best interest of everybody in our district. We take your opinions, under consideration. I know Scott was talking about earlier that we work a lot of hours and we don't get paid for it. Well, it's funny because in this off session, I've averaged probably 3 meetings a week. No complaints whatsoever. I'm glad to do it. This was a dream of mine to become a legislator in Orleans County, and I'm so glad that I've done it. But again, we can't do it alone. We need your input. Every time, I know Mike and I both vote on an issue, we think of what's best for the residents of Orleans County. But please give us a call anytime. You know, my cell phones, you look at anywhere on the legislative webpage, and you're going to see my numbers. You know, my email address is readily available to you. Gladly, if you contact me, I certainly will get back to you, and I appreciate your input.
Well, I think, you know, it's been a pleasure for me to serve 12 years at the State House, and it is a tough job. You know, I'd asked, my sister was down there one day for a conference, and I said, come on in to the committee and see what we do. And she spent about 10 minutes in there, and afterwards she says, I don't know how you do this. And I hear that from a lot of constituents that come down. So, you know, it's not an easy job, but for me, it's a job I really love. And I think the best part is the ability to help people navigate through the system. And, you know, when it comes to, you know, having issues with the Department of Motor Vehicles or any other agency, that you're able to go in and try to straighten it out, and most of the time we are able to straighten it out. So,
And having served with you, Mike, and I haven't served with Gary, but in serving with you, I know you are so highly respected because you're not necessarily a political beast who sees right down party lines, because those people I find to be truly aggravated. I found that you floated all over the place and you worked for what is right. And I know Gary personally, and I know you probably do the exact same thing.
yeah,
Certainly try.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Republican, but I've worked well with the Speaker and with the Democratic leadership to put things, to come up with compromises. When we had issues with the unemployment trust fund a few years ago, I worked with Mike Obuchowski, former Speaker. He and I worked together to push it forward in order to get something, because it became apparent that nothing was going to happen.
Yeah,
So.
it's all about working together. And
Exactly.
okay, I want to thank you for coming on, and thank you for your service, because yes, as we've talked about, love you or hate you, the people underneath that golden dome, there's a lot of people who take their jobs seriously. We might not agree with them, but there's a lot of people who really take their work seriously.
Yes.
And thank you for your service.
Well, thank you for asking us to be here today.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Scott. We appreciate it.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.